The fall of the Roman Empire and the rise of Islam. Whenever modern civilizations reflect on their own mortality, there is one ghost that invariably rises from its grave to haunt their imaginations in February 1776, a few months after Edward Gibbon grimly broke the news from America, where the rebellion against Britain seemed inevitable, the decline of the two empires, Roman and British, and the British were declining at an equal pace. Now, as the West slipped into recession and glancing nervously over its shoulder at China, the same parallel is being erased. Last summer, when The Guardian's Larry Elliott wrote an article on the U.S. economy, the headline almost spelled the decline and fall of the American empire to historians. The truth, becoming increasingly uncomfortable with accounts of decline and fall, few people would now agree that the conquest of Roman territory by foreign invaders was gelled by Noah's neck of classical civilization. The transformation from the ancient world to the Middle Ages is recognized as something much more protracted. Late antiquity is the term that scholars use during the centuries that have witnessed its course. Roman power may have collapsed, but the various cultures of the Roman Empire mutated and evolved. We see in the later part of the Roman Empire, observed and believed Cameron, one of the leading historians, a host of experiments of new ways of testing and new adjustments. Yet it's a cultural peculiarity, the transformation of the Roman world into something recognizably medieval, that it has produced extraordinary stories, even though it impoverished the ability of the modern to keep track of them. Is the greatest, perhaps the most horrific scene in the history of mankind is how Gibbon described his subject. He was hardly exaggerating. The decline and fall of the Roman Empire were so momentous convulsion that even today its influence on history with an enduring popular purchase remains perhaps greater than the hat of any other episode in history. Yet an effort can be made to recognize it in most narratives based on the world of late antiquity, from world religions to recent science fiction and fantasy. Romanesque context provided by the fall of the Roman Empire was generally camouflaged or disguised. Consider a single sheet of papyrus with the decidedly un-romantic nickname PRF 558. It was discovered back in the 19th century in the Heracleopolis, Egypt. Faded. The ruined city of Cairo. Heracleopolis itself spent most of his vani in a state of nago sleep. Provincial city, and then after the conquest of the country by Alexander of Macedon as a colony, ruled by and mostly for the Greeks. Make up if this new elite was to prove its solid 000 years later, and some 600 years after its absorption into the Roman Empire, Heracleopolis still bore the name that gave on the banks of the Nile a little touch of distant Greece, the city of Hercules. 558 also, in its own modest way, also testified to the influence on Egypt for a millennium of foreign rule. It was a receipt issued for 65 sheep presented to two officials with the impeccably Hellenic names Christopher and Theodorakis in Greek, but not only in Greek on the papyrus sheet, was also presented with a second language that had never been in Egypt before. What he was doing there, according to the official Sheep Council receipt, according to a note added in Greek on the back, was requisition. Magarif from Arabia, long ago rejected by the Romans as despicable and insignificant. Apparently these barbarians were now in a position to extort sheep from the The city councillors proposed a dramatic reversal of fortune, and this is not all the strangest revelation of receiving may have laid bare the fact that a race of unchanging nomadic bandits who, for as far back as anyone could remember, had been lost to unchanging barbarism, seemed developed their own calendar. The 30th of the month formed the first, so the receipt was registered on the Greek date, which served to place it in 642 years from the birth of Christ, but it was also so the receipt announced in the native language of the Saracens. 22 years since what is some sort of momentous event of no doubt, obviously of great importance to the Saracens themselves. Saracens themselves. But what was it, and could it have contributed to the arrival of the newcomers in Egypt, and how it must have been to this mysterious name? Magaray Taif 558 does not say. Now we can recognize the document as a marker of something seismic. Margaret was destined to implant herself in a country far more steadfastly than either the Greeks or the Romans ever did. Greeks or Romans, the Arabic language that they brought with them, and it looks like such a novelty on the PRF 558 is now so native to Egypt that the country will become a powerhouse of Arabic culture. Yet even the transformation of this order hardly addresses the full extent of the changes, which are so prosaic. New Age of which this is the a tax receipt issued in Heracleopolis in the year 22 is believed to be the oldest surviving dated document was enacted into law. It is for nearly 1 in 4 people living today is a matter of more than of mere historical interest, infinitely more because it concerns, in their view, the very nature, the divine question of what exactly led the Magaray Ta'iya and the global religion of Islam is precisely the prompting of God's hand, and not just a maddening desire to extort sheep that first prompted the Arabs to leave their deserted homeland. Was the judgment of Ibn Hisham, the Egyptian scholar who wrote a century and a half later this first appearance, Marguerite in Heracleopolis, sowing a fascination for this period and the remarkable events that depicted it, was all consuming by the year 00 AD. Marguerite era, and was no longer considered a novelty. Instead is now known Muslims, or those who obey God. They managed to conquer for themselves a vast agglomeration of territories, a truly a global empire. Ibn Hisham, looking back on the age when the Arabs first realized themselves as a chosen and surrounded by the ruins of a replacement Chi, certainly had no shortage of pages to fill out the PRF 558 receipt for 65 sheep issued in the year 22. Written in Greek and Arabic. Photo of the National Museum in Vienna that I was at brought the Arabs in as conquerors to cities like Heracleopolis and far beyond. Ibn Hisham's ambition was to give an answer. He told the story of an Arab who lived almost 2 centuries and was chosen by God as the seal of his prophets Muhammad. Although Ibn Hisham himself certainly drew on earlier material, his biography is the oldest biography extant as we have it today. The details he provided will become fundamental to the W of those days. Muslims have interpreted their belief that Muhammad received a series of divine, that he grew up in the depths of Ravi, in the pagan Hippo, Mecca, that he fled from it to another city I3 where he founded a primitive Muslim state, that this flight or hijra changed the whole order of time and came to provide the Muslims with their year. All this was captured. The momentous effect of Ibn Hisham's, the contrast between Islam and the era that preceded it, was depicted in A biography as clear as from noon to the middle of the night, the white glow of Muhammad's revelations. Of Muhammad's revelations blazing first throughout Arabia and then to the ends of the world, has served to bring all mankind into a new age of light. The effect of this faith was to prove incalculable to this day even among non-Muslims. He continues to inform about how the interpretation and understanding of the history of the Middle East, be it books, museums or universities, the ancient world seems to have ended with the arrival Muhammad, yet even on the assumption that something about what Islam teaches Islam is correct and that Muhammad's revelations really did come down from heaven, he's still pushing the idea to imagine that the theater of his conquests was suddenly convened in the imagination during the course of 1 year. And the fall of the Roman Empire was too easily forgotten. Put these conquests in their proper context and a narrative paying attention to the lesson that Gibbon taught back in the 15th century, that the invasion of Europe by barbarians and the Saracen victories were different aspects of the same thing, serves to open up a perspective on the drama not charted. Traditional Muslim. The narrative of the landscape through which the Maghreb was certainly not unique to Egypt. Egypt's west also had provinces that had witnessed the retreat and the collapse of a superpower to the slavery of foreign invaders and the desperate struggle of the locals to make a new security in the last few decades that this prospect has been restored to its proper place in the spotlight. Yet it is curious that long before historian Peter Brown came to write his seminal volume, The Ural de Late Antiquity, which traced to the influence of a pattern for half a millennium between Marcus Aurelius and the founding of Baghdad, a number of best-selling novels got there first. The work served to demonstrate that the fall of the Roman Empire, even after a millennium and a half later, has not lost its power to inspire compelling narrative. At that time in the galaxy, there were nearly 25 million inhabited planets and not one of them had been betrayed to the Empire, whose place was on the Trans-Torah. This was the last half-century in which it could. So begins the background of Asimov's Bono into Space, first published in 1951. It depicted a galactic empire on the brink of collapse and an attempt by an enlightened group of scientists to guarantee what would follow its downfall possible. The impact of the novel and its two sequels has been enormous and can be seen in every subsequent science fiction epic that depicts a sprawling empire among the stars, from Star Wars to Battlestar Galactica. Unlike most of his, Asimov drew direct sustenance from his parabola historical model. Asimov's narrative closely corresponds to the parabola of the Jibo. The face of Nara are making their last visit. Imperial outposts, interstellar equivalents of the Frankish or acute OTS kingdoms are sprouting at the edge of the Milky Way. The empire, like its Roman predecessor under Justinian, is trying to return to the very intrigue that in the second novel in the series we find ourselves in has gone to a mysterious character named Mule, who seemingly appears out of nowhere to transform the thought patterns of billions and conquer most of the galaxy. The context pretty clearly makes it clear that he's meant to be reiterating Muhammad's NFT Terry ND tribute. Asimov's homage to the Muslim tradition even casts Mula as a mutant of a nature so unexpected that nothing in human science could explain or foresee his parallels to the The stories told about Muhammad are themselves are evident in the second sin in the epic of Frank Herbert's interstellar empire Dune. A prophet arises from the depths of a deserted to humiliate the empire and begin holy war jihad. Herbert's hero Paul the 3-day is a man whose sense of supernatural missions overshadowed by insecurity. I can't do the simplest thing he can think of without becoming. Time will prove him right. Without ever intending to, he's founded a new religion and unleashes a wave of war that eventually convulses the galaxy. In the end we know will be only legend and nothing will stop the jihad. There's an irony in this echo, not only of the spectacular growth of the historic of the caliphate, but also of the way in which the traditions told about Muhammad. Ibn Hisham's biography may have the first who survived, but it was not the last. As the years passed and more of the Prophet's life became written, details became more and more marvelous. Fresh evidence without suspicion from the earliest biographers. Muhammad would be seen high is revered as a man capable of predicting the future, to receive communication from camels and raise a soldier's eyeball again, insert it and make it work better than before. Another miracle. The further away from the Prophet the biographer tone is likely to be more extensive with his biography novel. Herbert counterpoint fragments of an unreliable biography in which Paul became the legendary Dune Messiah, with the core part of the narrative that reveals a more secular truth. So is of course the prerogative of fiction nonetheless. For the historian it offers a troubling question: to what extent the traditions told by Muslims, both their prophets, can contradict the actual reality of the historical Muhammad, and is it that only Western scholars who tend to ask this as well? For example, the Salafists want to remove the accretion of centuries and reveal to believers the full untainted purity of the primitive Muslim state. But what if, after the cladding was laid, there was nothing left but the odd receipt for the sheep? That Muhammad existed is evident from the scattered testimonies of Christian contemporaries, and that the very Maghrib references to the year 22, but do we see in the mirror held up by Ibn Hisham and the biographer who followed him is a true reflection of Muhammad's life, or is it something distorted by the recognition, the combination of the stock of true essay and the passage of time, perhaps lacking early Muslim sources for the life Muhammad, but in other regions of the former Roman Empire there are even more haunting silences. The most profound of all, perhaps it's the one who settled in the not once province of Britannia around 800 AD at the same time that Ibn Hisham was compiling a list of the 9 slain in the remote wilderness of Wales, was compiling a very similar record of victories, a total of 12, all attributed to one leader and cast by their historian as undoubted proof of God's blessings. The monk's name was Nennius, the name of his hero who was to live long before that was Arthur the British, a warlord like the Arab prophet was destined to have a lasting afterlife in the same centuries, when Muslim historians would be modeling increasingly detailed and loving stories of Muhammad, and his companions would also witness, far beyond the caliphate, the gradual transformation of the mysterious Arthur and his minions into a model Christian court. The battles listed above will largely be forgotten in their place. They will be haunted by a haunting representation of the whole of Christianity. Is the belief there once existed a world where the strong protected the weak, where the bravest warriors were the purest in heart, and where a sense of Christian fellowship bound to the maintenance of the common order. The ideal was Prizzy Aus van so much so that to this day there remains a mystique attached to the name Camelot.